So my name is Hany Fahim. I'm the founder and CEO of VM Farms. VM Farms is kind of, it's a DevOps as a service company. We offer a highly scalable and cost-effective alternative to building your own in-house operations team. Today I'm continuing a series of talks called Tales from the Ops Side. So one of the best parts about this job is you get to see so many different things and experience a lot of world events. So today's talk is called How Brazil Kept Us Up at Night. So the date was Wednesday, December 16, 2015. It was around 8 p.m. I was at home. Me and my wife were watching TV. We're watching Bob's Burgers. Love this show. It's fantastic if you haven't seen it. When my phone rang, apparently one of our customer sites had gone down. And they were calling in some reinforcements because this is a pretty big customer of ours. This is a snippet of our handy little chatbot that we have that kind of logs a bunch of information and gives us context as to what's going on. So it's telling us this customer went down. It was kind of an HTTP timeout. It does a DNS resolution lookup to see maybe somebody messed up some DNS settings, but no, everything was resolving properly. Gives us some links to some reports if we wanted to dig in a little bit further. This one's a little neat trick that we do where we monitor for deploys, so we can tell if somebody did a bad deploy or something and it related to an outage. In this case over here, they deployed about 12 hours ago, so probably not a really tight correlation there. So it was very strange, so we kept digging in a little bit further. As we're digging, we started getting a few more alerts in our chat channel there, which is where all our conversations happen. So we can see from the load balancer over here that traffic was up about 1,000%, which is ridiculously high for this particular customer over here. We also get some load alerts as well on the servers. The servers were kind of completely overwhelmed. This is an example of one where load is just spiked to a really, really high number. So immediately our thought was, is this an attack? Is this some sort of attack going on in this customer? Because we had to figure out, should we be defending ourselves or should we be scaling up because it could be legitimate? These are two very, very different paths, and it was really important for us to figure out which one to make so we don't waste a lot of time spinning our wheels doing one activity when we should be doing the other. So it's critically important to figure this out, so we had to kind of take it to that next level and dive in. So we decided to hop onto the load balancers and start to look at the traffic patterns to try to establish some sort of pattern over here. Start to look at the top source IPs to determine if there was a pattern. Now I've scrubbed the IPs here to protect the innocent, but essentially what you can see is that the spread here was really wide. There's no particular concentration of IPs that are hitting it over here. So this tells you a little bit of something. If this was an attack, people know about DOS attacks. You've heard DOS attacks, denial of service. So if it was a denial of service attack, usually you would see a few IPs that are orders of magnitude larger than anybody else hitting this. So it's not a DOS attack. It could be a distributed DOS attack, a DDoS attack, meaning that it's thousands and thousands of basically bots trying to hit your site and take you down. So it's probably not a DOS attack. Could be a DDoS attack. We had to dig further. So next step was we decided to perform a series of whois lookups to try to figure out, where are these IPs coming from? Where are the top ranking IPs? So we started looking at the whois traffic for there, and it was very, very consistent throughout the whole time. It was all coming from the same source. It was all coming from Brazil. Some interesting facts about Brazil. According to Akamai in 2014, Brazil was ranked number 7 in the world for top attack traffic. So this is like DDoSes, exploits, hacking. They're one of the biggest contributors to this. Other reports that I've seen place them at number 2. And this actually matches our own experience that we've seen in-house because we manage a lot of different customers. Usually when customer sites are hacked or attacked, Brazil is usually up there. In our own experience, they're ranked as number 5. So things are kind of looking a little suspicious at this point here. Nothing definitive yet, but looks like it's leaning towards attack and we have to defend ourselves. So I started hunting for more patterns. We gotta match up a little bit more. There's gotta be some consistency going on here. A lot of traffic coming from Brazil is very unusual. So perhaps there was some sort of pattern. Started looking at the logs and analyzing. We're looking for URL paths. We're looking for user agents. We're looking for referral addresses to see if there's anything to correlate. Right at that moment, another site went down. This customer over here, similar kind of specs, is a timeout. DNS looked fine. They didn't deploy recently 3 hours ago. You know, could be correlated, but it wasn't very definitive at that point. But at that point, one of our guys pointed out that there's a lot of similarities here because these two clients were both in the security VPN space at the same time. So it was the same traffic. High traffic spread out over many different IPs, all from Brazil, high load on the API servers, and there's definitely something going on in Brazil with these customers. So where would you look to find out what's going on? It's very fitting that we're here because we took to Twitter. We typed into the search bar, we typed in simply Brazil, and immediately there were a flood of tweets going on over there. And they're mostly in Portuguese, but it's basically Big Brother in action. Justice ordered the block of WhatsApp for 48 hours. The government ordered WhatsApp block for 2 days. I think many people will be going to jail over this. It was true. It turned out to be true. You'll notice the timestamp over here is almost 11 p.m. So this is 3 hours after the incident took place. The news articles start showing up on the internet describing what this event had, which is way, way, way too late for anything to happen. So Twitter was very valuable here. Some background about Brazil. So Brazil has a very rocky relationship with WhatsApp. Officially, this whole block was put into place because Brazil claimed that WhatsApp was not participating and they were in non-compliance with handing over user data, which is encrypted. So WhatsApp kind of prides themselves on encrypting end-to-end all your data going back and forth. And they were saying that you need to basically give us access to all this user data. They knew that WhatsApp could not, were unable to retrieve this, but they kind of gave them that ultimatum anyway to kind of tell them that you have to do this. Unofficially, if you kind of dig in through the course of my research, what's happening here is the Brazilian telecom companies are losing enormous amounts of profit to WhatsApp. They're basically getting drained because more and more users are using WhatsApp. In fact, after digging in, the numbers are ridiculously staggering. Apparently 93% of Brazil's internet population uses WhatsApp, which is insane. Doctors use it to communicate with their patients, businessmen use it to conduct transactions, and people who cannot afford a phone but have a phone plan, they embrace the free services in there. So people just pay for data and they don't use a phone plan at all. So with an internet population of 100 million, that's 93 million users in Brazil alone, which is 50% of the country. It is by far the single most used app in the entire country. This tweet went viral. It's kind of saying me without WhatsApp, basically saying that his life is completely turned upside down now because they don't have access to this. So this changed our mind. All of a sudden, it turned out it looks like it's not an attack, that this is actually legitimate traffic. So it was time to go the other direction of scaling up. We had to massively scale up these two customers at the same time. We started building out API servers in a mad frenzy, but the traffic just kept soaring the entire time. We just kept throwing servers, everything that we got at it. By midnight, things finally started to curb. Traffic started to wane a little bit, and we were finally caught up and getting a little bit ahead of the curve. So we thought, finally, we did it and went to bed, or so we thought. We got another PagerDuty alert letting us know that there's more incidents going on. Around 5:30 a.m., both sites reported as down again. Traffic had spiked, and this time it was way higher than it was the previous night. It was pretty accurate that Brazil is waking up. They're waking up, and more people were trying to log on to these VPN servers. One customer in particular was 5 times the original size that they had been just 12 hours ago. So again, it's time to scale up, throw more servers at it, just keep going. So we're finally, a few hours later, we were able to stabilize things again, kind of keep ahead of the curve. But then we started seeing some other issues. Other parts of the system started to buckle. Traffic was still kind of climbing there, but load was decreasing. So all of a sudden, this phenomenon didn't make any sense. Traffic just kept going up, but then load went down. We reached some sort of magical balance of servers to traffic, but no, the sites went down again. Something else was up. We kept throwing more servers, it didn't do anything at all. The site was still down, and load across the system was actually flatlining, which didn't make any sense at all. We make use of a technology called HA proxy, which is probably my favorite piece of technology out there. In version 1. It's a load balancer. In version 1.5, they added support for SSL termination. So this is where a little bit of the techie part comes in. We noticed a large connection time doing the SSL handshake. So SSL handshake, every time you make a secure connection on the internet, there's a handshake that goes on that exchanges a whole bunch of encryption information to make sure everything is secure. There's this neat little trick you can do with the utility called curl, where you can actually break down all the different stages of a connection. And you can use this little template business over here, and then you can output and try to connect it. And if you'll notice over here, there's this little value called app connect, and it was almost an entire second kind of just hanging around in this stage. This is before it even sends a request over to the server. Almost an entire second just hanging around over here. I had no idea what app connect meant, so I looked it up in the manual, and it says the time it took from the start until the SSL handshake with our remote host was completed. So this is just the SSL handshake piece. It wasn't any request, it didn't even get to that part yet. This is really, really low layer. Didn't make any sense. Again, the sites are down, we're kind of under pressure to fix things. So we started looking at, maybe the server's a little bit overloaded. So ran this command called uptime, and you can see that the load average is hovering around 1. Now, without getting too complicated, load basically means the number represents of how busy a server is. So load of 1 is actually, under normal circumstances, is actually okay. On a 4-core box, so a box that has 4 CPUs, a load of 1 means that 1 CPU is busy all the time while the other 3 are doing nothing. So this is about 25% utilized, which is okay under most circumstances. We wouldn't think anything of it. And then until you realize that HA proxy is single process and single threaded. HA proxy can only do one thing at any given time. And on this server over here that has 4 cores, that means one CPU is busy doing the one thing that HA proxy can do, and the other 3 are doing absolutely nothing. So this is technically overloaded. But our monitors weren't configured for this, so it was very, very easy to miss. Trying to figure out why is this the case? How are we hitting a bottleneck in the CPU load? This has never happened with HA proxy before. Turned out to be this thing called logjam. Who here has heard of logjam? It's a vulnerability. A few of you? Yes, maybe. So logjam is the name they look to give these fancy names to vulnerabilities these days. It's a TLS exploit for a man-in-the-middle attack. So back in the 90s, the US government, this is the early days of the internet, the US government, all the way back then, they mandated that browsers and servers, so clients and servers, implement weak encryption. The idea, they called them export ciphers because they wanted to ensure that as software is traded globally, that they still had the ability to crack in and hack your encrypted session, so then they can get access to your data. All the way back then, the government was meddling, the US government was meddling with your affairs. We are still paying for it today. This is what this vulnerability was about. Luckily, most browsers these days, most well-behaving browsers, don't use these export ciphers, and they use all the stronger stuff that's going on. But somebody was able, or this team was able to find an exploit that allowed you to downgrade to these weaker encryption. So if you can think about it, back in the 90s, and this is weak encryption, I mean, my laptop can probably do it in a few minutes. It was a really bad exploit at this point. So if you read about the technical details, to kind of curb this effect of this logjam vulnerability, they recommend to increase something called your Diffie-Hellman parameters, your DH params, to 2048 bits. This is extremely computationally expensive. For a computer to have a DH parameters of 2048 bits is really, really expensive for your computer. Our tests have shown that if you just cut this in half, which most systems use 1024 by default, it decreases load by 50%. So if you think about this overloaded server that we had over here, it had 2048 bits. Half of the CPU time was doing nothing but just handling decryption. This enormous amount of overhead just because you have to do this to decrease the vulnerability. So when we fix this vulnerability for our clients, we caused another issue, which is every server just got a lot more loaded. Okay, so it was the DH parameters. Now it's time to build more proxies. At the same time we're building all these app servers, we also had to build more load balancers because we didn't really have an answer at that time on how to fix this. Set up something called DNS round robin, so then it spins around and hits all the servers at this time. We had to quadruple the number of proxies before things were stable again. All this time, we're just building and throwing as many servers as we can at the situation. And then 10:30 came around and everything was silent. Load had stopped. everything was green, everything was calm. We checked the servers, all the alerts cleared. We thought, okay, we're down again. We've hit some other issue. We went to their sites. No, they were up. They were actually extremely fast because they had a massive army of servers behind it. It didn't make any sense. What was going on? So again, took to Twitter to try to figure it out. And it looks like the people had won. The judge apparently less than 24 hours after they put the ban that they're supposed to last for 2 days, they lifted it. And the government apparently, the courts found that what they were doing was unfairly punishing their users. So the people had won. This is incredible. They lifted the ban, and that's why everything calmed down, because nobody had to circumvent their government anymore. So it was really interesting because we never really saw the true peak. At 10:30 a.m., it was still, traffic was very much ramping up when things kind of stopped over there and the block was released. We did not see that full run. So out of curiosity, after everything had settled, we were trying to figure out, is there a way that we can figure out what that true peak was? Because if something like this could happen now, it'll probably happen again, and we want to be prepared for it next time. So we tried to see it. Didn't really get down into this answer, but it was really interesting as we started digging deep into this problem over here. In 2003, the Brazilian government, a different Brazilian government at the time, they launched an initiative to offer low-cost, tax-free computers to anybody who wanted it, which is really, really progressive at the time. They mandated the use of Linux and open source software, and they basically outright rejected Microsoft and said, sorry guys, they actually made it very publicized in the news to kind of humiliate Microsoft, and said, you guys were rejecting your bid to become the OS of choice for this new program called PC Conectado. This also included all government ministries and state-owned systems and education facilities as well. And it's pretty impressive that they did that. Microsoft, when they were trying to bid, they kept saying, you guys are too expensive. Microsoft said, well, we'll give you our Windows software, but we'll just disable a whole bunch of features and then give it to you for cheaper. And they're like, sorry, that's not going to cut it. So you got to think about this for a second, right? Linux and open source in general has really, really come a long way. This is back in 2003. It still requires some technical know-how to operate. They've done a really good job at making the user experience really smooth, but it still kind of requires a lot of technical know-how, at least some. So unlike Windows and Mac, you kind of have to pop open the hood and tinker underneath it, right? So after more than a decade of this program, the result is a very highly technical population. And we've actually observed this phenomenon directly ourselves. So recently, we started at VM Farms. We opened up our hiring practices to global as well, because we're an internet company. We can work with remote employees. And what we saw a staggering number of highly qualified individuals that apply from Brazil. Usually, when we get resumes, we'd say about 10% of them are good, so 90% of them are garbage. Except for Brazil, I'd say that's closer to 30 or 40% of them are actually, worth that phone call to take them to the next stage. So, in our opinion, it's actually highly related to this program that they started over a decade ago. I mean, there's really no other way of putting it. Why would this phenomenon happen over here? So it was really interesting. So you take these two pieces and you kind of put it together, right? The government enables their people and they give them a lot of technical knowledge, and then they try to block access to the single most used application in the entire country. No wonder that people were using these VPN services to get around it. It kind of makes sense, because VPN, I mean, even the concept of using a VPN is something that not the average user could understand, but this highly technical population does, and they very much understand it. And remember before I talked about how Brazil is one of the highest ranking sources of attack traffic. That probably explains it as well, right? They're just very technical. They know how to hack their way. You can kind of get the good with the bad. So with all this information, you say 93% of the population uses WhatsApp. They're highly technical. You can probably imagine that we're somewhere in the many tens of millions of people that could possibly have the ability to circumvent the government, which is a ridiculous number. But some lessons that we learned and we took away after the fact. Like I said, I love HA proxy, but that limitation really, really bugged us. So we actually were able to find a way, because it's so flexible, we were able to find a way to make HA proxy work with multiple cores. I said before that it can only utilize its single process and single threaded, but there's a way to actually get it to use all the processes at the same time. However, if you read the massive manual there, it's riddled with warnings that saying, hey, don't use this feature if you're using multiple processes. There's ways of circumventing it each time, and we were actually successful in doing this. And now this is something we deploy everywhere to make use of all the processors that just sit there. Second point, Twitter is an invaluable resource for getting up-to-date information on current events. I tell you, like I said, 3 hours before the first news story was posted, during that time, if we did not have Twitter, we probably would have gone the first route of trying to defend ourselves. We probably would have been blocking all the Brazilians trying to circumvent their government had we not seen that information. Twitter has been a very, very valuable resource for this particular situation over here. And finally, government censorship and blockades rarely work, especially when you arm your people with knowledge. I mean, you give them the tools to circumvent you, and then you try blocking their most used app. That's not going to work. And that's all I got. Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
So you're talking about the fork in the road, right, where you're trying to figure out should I be trying to defend these customers and defend the system, or should I be trying to scale up? Now, investigating these things is oftentimes, a bit manual intensive. You're doing investigation, even if you're using some more semi-automated techniques to have that sort of think of figure out what's going on and try to, be creative about these things.
Right.
But scaling up, I would think, would be there's more flexibility, more potential for automation. So how, I guess, tool intensive was the scaling up decision? Could it have been something that you could have done sort of in parallel by saying, okay, let's set the scale up thing and let it catch up to the resources while we try to figure this out, hedge our bets a little, or have you been able to evolve to that today? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so I get the question is basically with the decision to defend or to scale up, should we have not done scaling up just by default anyway while we figured out if we should be defending ourselves? So the key factor here is cost, because as you add more servers, obviously costs go up. And in this case, because of the enormous surge in traffic, we saw it as 1,000%. We'd have to really, I mentioned before the second round hit, a customer was 5 times their size, which dramatically impacted their bill. And I wouldn't want to, because it's our responsibility as their provider to kind of be that front line and make those smart decisions. I'd hate to be like, I'm going to spend a lot of your money while I try to figure out which way to go. Honestly, this is why I keep saying that Twitter is a great resource. It took us, the entire first half of the story was about 10 minutes in length. So we were able to determine, because of Twitter, within 10 minutes whether we should go. If it had gone any further, I probably would have done that route and said, we don't have time, you're down. We probably would have scaled up while we tried to figure that out. So that's why it was critical at that point to figure it out, and Twitter was great for that. If I had waited the 3 hours, 100% I would have scaled up and tried to figure it out after the fact. Any other questions? Yes?
So if not Brazil, who's next?
So, very good question. Since this talk, so this was December that I talked about this. Brazil has done it 2 more times since I originally wrote this talk. They did it, I think, in March, and they did it maybe, I think, last month. So actually, after all the lessons and we've implemented all the fixes, we actually almost didn't feel the other 2 because we did a lot of work on trying to fix that. Turkey was another interesting one. You saw that their government seems to be very dictatorial about it. They started blocking social media so very often, and it impacts the same customers every single time because they also know how to circumvent. Now, the scales are not even close. Brazil's was way, way, way higher. Again, I attribute it to their technical population. They just know how to circumvent the government. They're probably laughing in their faces. Turkey was very impactful. It actually, I think about 2 years ago, they did that first, and it impacted these customers greatly because we had no idea that these types of events could have these repercussions. So we were prepared back then. Brazil kind of opened our eyes to a whole new magnitude that we never would have experienced. But they keep doing this. So now it's almost become commonplace, all these governments putting these blockades, and everyone's just easily circumventing them every time. But yeah, so it's happened to Turkey, it's happened to Brazil. There's another country that did it, but it was really, really small, almost not even noteworthy. But I mean, lost the name of that country that did it.
So just a quick follow-up to that. Did you learn anything from Egypt?
From Egypt. So Egypt happened before these.
Yeah,
was a long time
and
ago.
knowing that they were being blocked and so on.
Yeah.
Did you learn anything from that?
I mean, Egypt did something even worse. They cut off the internet.
Right.
Right? They went and I actually think they cut off the connections to Europe, and they cut off the internet. So what people were doing, I know actually, so my family's from Egypt, and I know some of my family members, they actually were using old school telephones and using modems to actually communicate and get the internet. So they're doing it over 56K baud modems. So the only thing they can do, the internet is completely useless on a 56K modem. The only thing they can do was send tweets, because they're small, tiny little, characters, 164 characters, sending it out. The only thing they can do, and they use that to rally all the people around. So again, that power of the text, the little short text, it goes a long way. I mean, that works on a 56K modem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yes.
Does WhatsApp have a presence in China?
Good question. I actually don't know. I don't think so. Because I'm pretty sure the Chinese government would not allow it. You're shaking your head no? I don't think so. They have, like most of China, they have alternatives to that. So they have other chat protocols. They have a different Facebook. They have a different Google out there. So I'm pretty sure they would not allow that, because WhatsApp has made it very likely as a result of this. They made it a point now. If any of you, who uses WhatsApp here? Have you noticed recently how you get these messages that talk about end-to-end encryption? And this is recent, very likely as a result of Brazil kind of taking their stance and saying, we need you to give us access to customer data. So they took the opposite stance, saying there's no way that you're going to get it now. It's completely blocked, end-to-end encryption. There's no way we would even know, and we don't have the key, so we can't tell you. So I don't think it's in China, but I don't know definitively. Yes?
93 million users. Do you estimate how many of those actually were accessing the VPN?
Only a fraction of that for this customer, because obviously there's many choices for VPN. It would have been staggering, in the millions of people that if we had saw the full brunt of traffic. I mean, you got to realize at the time they were going up and down constantly, as were all the other providers. I mean, you read news stories about other VPN providers that were just down the whole time. So everyone is probably hopping from provider to provider, finding whoever is up so that they can circumvent them, because at the end of the day, they mostly do the same thing. Different providers have different policies and how they treat user data, which is important. If you're trying to circumvent your government, don't try to find a VPN provider that's not going to log your IP address, because the government's just going to go and say, give us that data, and we're going to go and hunt you down. So everyone is going up and down at that time. It's hard to estimate how many people were actually there. But yeah, it's a good question. It would have been in the millions, I would expect. Yes?
From a business point of view, how do you protect yourself, given how you just, for example, like different governments can ask you to hand over people's IP address. From a business point of view, how do you protect yourself from this request that?
It's a very good question. How do we protect ourselves, with governments trying to come in and mandate it? I think we're lucky that we're Canadian-based. Our laws, our Canadian laws, are actually fairly reasonable. So we haven't been asked yet. Most of the time, the data doesn't even belong to us. I usually take that stance that we are just acting on behalf of our customers. So if you really want it, you got to go to them directly. It's a good question. I mean, come after and talk to me. I got an interesting tale about the Patriot Act in the U.S. One of our customers got impacted by that and the results. So it happens in the U.S. I'm really happy that we live in this country and that our servers and everything are local. We're somewhat protected by that, but at the end of the day, if somebody really wanted it and there was something malicious, I'm not sure what would happen there. These forces are beyond me. It's a very good question, though. I think being in Canada definitely has an advantage. Any other questions at all? No, we're out of time. Thank you very much.